Welcome back to part 2 of our journey through the first 44 U.S. presidents. We rejoin the story not long after the Civil War, as the nation continued to grow and face new challenges on the world stage. We begin with Benjamin Harrison, 23rd President. As the grandson of former President William Henry Harrison, he was part of a political dynasty. His single term is notable for a milestone in government growth. Under his administration, the federal government's peacetime spending exceeded $1 billion for the very first time. He also worked to pass early laws aimed at ensuring fair competition between businesses, though these were not always strong enough to curb the power of large monopolies. Next came Grover Cleveland, 24th President, making history himself as the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. This second term, however, was dominated by a severe economic depression. Cleveland firmly believed in limited government intervention and offered little direct federal aid to the suffering public. This philosophy reached a climax when he sent U.S. Army troops to break up a major strike by the American Railway Union, a decision that was deeply controversial and seen by many as siding with big business over workers. William McKinley, 25th President, presided over a nation eager to assert itself. To protect American industry, he raised taxes on imported goods to record highs. His presidency also turned outward. After the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, America went to war with Spain to support Cuba's independence. The quick victory resulted in the U.S. acquiring overseas territories, including the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, marking its emergence as a global power. Tragically, early in his second term, McKinley was assassinated by a Polish-American anarchist named Leon Czolgosz. This brought Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President, at just 42 years old, into the Oval Office. He was a force of nature, both in his personal life and his presidency. Nicknamed the Trust Buster, he used federal power to break up harmful business monopolies. He was equally vigorous in foreign policy, championing the completion of the Panama Canal and promoting American influence worldwide. A dedicated conservationist, he set aside vast amounts of land for national forests and parks. For negotiating an end to the Russo-Japanese War, he even won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was followed by his chosen successor, William Howard Taft, 27th President. Taft was a brilliant legal mind but often uncomfortable with the politics of the presidency. While he continued many progressive reforms and actually brought more lawsuits against trusts than Roosevelt, he lost the support of his more radical former allies, including Roosevelt himself. Their split led Roosevelt to form a third party, dividing Republican voters and handing the next election to the Democrats. Ironically, Taft found his true calling later in life, becoming the only person to serve as both President and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The Democrat who won that contentious 1912 election was Woodrow Wilson, 28th President, a former university professor and the first Southerner elected since the Civil War. He focused on progressive economic reforms at home. After initially keeping America neutral, the repeated sinking of U.S. ships by German submarines led him to guide the nation into World War I. His great vision was for a new, peaceful world order through the League of Nations. However, this dream was thwarted when the U.S. Senate, fearing permanent international entanglements, refused to let America join the very organization he helped create. After the war, the public sought a return to normalcy, electing Warren G. Harding, 29th President. He promised to scale back government and return to simpler times. His sudden death from a heart attack initially brought public sympathy, but that soon turned to scandal as investigations revealed widespread corruption among his cabinet officials, as well as his own extramarital affairs, devastating his legacy. Calvin Coolidge, 30th President, who finished Harding's term and then won his own, was a man of quiet, conservative principles. Famous for his extremely frugal speech, Silent Cal believed deeply in minimal government intervention in business and society. He is still celebrated today by those who advocate for smaller government and lower taxes. This hands-off approach faced its ultimate test during the presidency of Herbert Hoover, 31st President. A brilliant engineer and humanitarian before taking office, Hoover's presidency was almost immediately engulfed by the Great Depression. Although he authorized major public works projects to stimulate the economy, he fundamentally opposed large-scale direct federal relief to individuals, believing it would create dependency. His policies were seen as too little, too late, and he left office widely blamed for the nation's suffering. This crisis ushered in Franklin D. Roosevelt, 32nd president, a distant cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. Stricken with polio as an adult, he projected unwavering optimism and energy. His immediate response was the New Deal, a sweeping package of federal programs, regulations, and work projects designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. He also improved federal policies toward Native Americans. Leading the nation through both the Depression and most of World War II, he was elected an unprecedented 4 times. He died in office in April 1945, just weeks before the Allied victory in Europe. His vice president, Harry S. Truman, 33rd president, suddenly inherited the mantle of leadership at a critical moment. To end the war in the Pacific quickly and save lives, he made the monumental decision to use the new atomic bomb on Japan. At home, he advanced progressive reforms and boldly prioritized civil rights, desegregating the military. Abroad, he established the Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan to contain communism and rebuild Europe, firmly setting the course for America's leadership role in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Finally, we come to Dwight D. Eisenhower, 34th President, the celebrated Supreme Allied Commander from World War II. His presidency, which we will explore in more detail next, brought a sense of steady, experienced leadership to a tense nuclear age, focusing on Cold War strategy and domestic prosperity as the nation navigated the post-war world. We continue our guide with Dwight D. Eisenhower, 34th President, a national hero who had been the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II. So respected was he that both major political parties tried to recruit him to run for president. As president, he was the first to be legally limited to 2 terms by the newly ratified 22nd Amendment. His foreign policy focused on containing the Soviet Union and cautiously managing the Cold War to avoid direct conflict. At home, America experienced a period of remarkable economic growth and stability. His most enduring domestic achievement was the creation of the Interstate Highway System, a massive public works project that reshaped the nation's infrastructure, economy, and culture. His successor was John F. Kennedy, 35th President, who broke barriers as the first Catholic president and, at age 43, the youngest ever elected to the office. He sought to inspire the country with a sense of new purpose and idealism. His administration made initial progress on civil rights, though major legislation would come later. His presidency is most famously defined by the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, where his calm leadership helped navigate a tense standoff with the Soviet Union that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Tragically, his life and presidency were cut short when he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, by Lee Harvey Oswald. Lyndon B. Johnson, 36th President, took office amid national grief and moved swiftly to enact an ambitious domestic agenda. He used his political skill to pass a wide-ranging series of reforms known as the Great Society, which aimed to eliminate racial injustice and poverty. This included landmark civil rights laws, Medicare, and Medicaid. However, frustration over the pace of social change erupted in race riots in many U.S. cities. Overseas, his presidency became dominated by the escalation of the Vietnam War, a deeply divisive conflict that would ultimately shadow his legacy. Richard Nixon, 37th President, is a figure of great contradiction. He achieved significant foreign policy successes, including opening diplomatic relations with China, pursuing détente, easing of tensions with the Soviet Union, and beginning the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam. However, his presidency was destroyed by the Watergate scandal, a series of crimes and cover-ups involving espionage and obstruction of justice. Facing near-certain impeachment by Congress, he became the first and only U.S. president to resign from office. Gerald Ford, 38th President, who had been appointed vice president after Spiro Agnew's resignation, then assumed the presidency. His first major act was to grant Nixon a full presidential pardon, an attempt to help the nation heal that severely damaged his own popularity. His term was also challenged by severe economic problems, including high inflation and a recession, and he continued Nixon's policy of reducing tensions with the Soviet Union. Jimmy Carter, 39th President, a former governor and peanut farmer, brought a strong moral focus to the office. He championed human rights in foreign policy and brokered a historic peace treaty between Egypt and Israel at Camp David. He also finalized the treaty returning control of the Panama Canal to Panama. Domestically, however, he struggled with an ongoing energy crisis, high inflation, and unemployment. His presidency was ultimately overwhelmed by the Iran hostage crisis, where 52 American diplomats were held captive for 444 days, contributing to a perception of weakened American power. Ronald Reagan, 40th president, a former Hollywood actor, was at age 69 the oldest person elected to the office at that time. His optimistic leadership and economic philosophy of tax cuts and deregulation are credited by many with revitalizing the U.S. economy after the struggles of the 1970s. He launched a war on drugs, massively increased military spending to engage the Soviet Union in an arms race, which he bluntly called the evil empire, and supported anti-communist movements worldwide. His policies are seen as pivotal in ultimately pressuring the Soviet Union to collapse. George H. W. Bush, 41st president, a decorated World War II pilot and former CIA director, presided over a world in transformation. He skillfully managed the peaceful collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. He also assembled a broad international coalition that successfully liberated Kuwait from Iraqi occupation during the First Gulf War in 1991. However, economic recession at home later hurt his popularity. Bill Clinton, 42nd president, led the country during a prolonged period of economic prosperity and peace in the 1990s, with low unemployment and falling crime rates. He oversaw the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and achieved a federal budget surplus. His legacy was marred by personal scandal, however, leading to his impeachment by the House of Representatives for perjury and obstruction of justice related to an affair with a White House intern. He was acquitted by the Senate and remained in office. George W. Bush, 43rd president, son of the 41st president, saw his presidency irrevocably shaped by the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. He launched a global war on terror, which led to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and, controversially, the invasion of Iraq over suspicions of weapons of mass destruction. These conflicts became long, costly, and divisive military engagements that defined his 2 terms. Barack Obama, 44th president, made history as the first African-American president. Taking office during the Great Recession, he signed a major economic stimulus package to rescue the financial system. His most significant domestic achievement was the Affordable Care Act, often called Obamacare, which expanded access to health insurance for millions of Americans. In foreign policy, he oversaw the operation that killed Osama bin Laden but grappled with the ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, authorizing a surge of troops and later directing efforts to combat the new terrorist threat of ISIS. This list includes many of the nation's leaders, from its foundational beginnings to the modern era. Their presidencies can be understood by grouping them into broad historical themes. The founding and early republic. This period established the American experiment. George Washington, first the indispensable first president who set countless precedents for the office and unified the new nation. John Adams, second steered the young country through foreign tensions and signed the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts. Thomas Jefferson, third author of the Declaration of Independence, he oversaw the Louisiana Purchase, dramatically expanding U.S. territory. James Madison, fourth, known as the father of the Constitution, he led the nation through the War of 1812. James Monroe, fifth, his era of good feelings, was defined by the Monroe Doctrine, declaring American opposition to European colonialism in the Americas. John Quincy Adams, sixth, a brilliant diplomat who championed national infrastructure projects, but struggled with a contentious political climate. Eras of expansion, division, and reconstruction. The nation grappled with westward growth, slavery, and civil war. Andrew Jackson, seventh, a polarizing populist who reshaped American politics, but whose legacy is marred by the forced removal of Native Americans via the Trail of Tears. Martin Van Buren, eighth, Jackson's vice president, who faced the severe panic of 1837 economic depression. James K. Polk, 11th, a massively consequential one-term president who waged war with Mexico, leading to vast territorial gains in the Southwest. Abraham Lincoln, 16th, preserved the Union during the Civil War and issued the Emancipation Proclamation. His leadership and martyrdom made him a legendary figure. Ulysses S. Grant, 18th the Union's commanding general who, as president, fought to protect the rights of freed slaves during Reconstruction, though his administration was plagued by corruption scandals. Rutherford B. Hayes, 19th his contested election led to the Compromise of 1877, which ended Reconstruction and removed federal troops from the South. James Garfield, 20th served only 200 days before being assassinated, highlighting the need for civil service reform, which was later championed by his successor. Chester A. Arthur, 21st surprising many, he signed the landmark Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. The Gilded Age and Progressive Era, a time of industrial transformation and efforts to reform its excesses. Grover Cleveland, 22nd and 24th, the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, known for his fiscal conservatism and opposition to imperialism. Benjamin Harrison, 23rd grandson of William Henry Harrison, his term saw the first billion-dollar peacetime budget and early antitrust legislation. William McKinley, 25th his presidency victory in the Spanish-American War established the U.S. as a global imperial power, acquiring territories like Puerto Rico and the Philippines. Theodore Roosevelt, 26th the dynamic, trustbuster, and conservationist who expanded presidential power and American influence abroad, epitomizing the progressive spirit. William Howard Taft, 27th, a dedicated constitutionalist who continued antitrust suits but split from Roosevelt's progressive wing, leading to a Democratic victory in 1912. World Wars, Depression, and Global Leadership. The U.S. emerged as a world superpower. Woodrow Wilson, 28th, led the nation through World War I and championed the League of Nations, though the Senate rejected U.S. membership. Calvin Coolidge, 30th, a pro-business conservative who embodied the prosperous, roaring '20s with his belief in minimal government intervention. Herbert Hoover, 31st, his presidency was overwhelmed by the onset of the Great Depression, and his reluctance to provide large-scale federal relief doomed his re-election. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 32nd, elected 4 times. He led the nation through the Great Depression with the New Deal and through most of World War II. Harry S. Truman, 33rd, made the decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan, led the early Cold War containment strategy, and desegregated the military. Dwight D. Eisenhower, 34th World War II hero who managed Cold War tensions and launched the interstate highway system, fostering domestic prosperity. The modern presidency, from Cold War to 21st century. An era defined by social change, geopolitical strife, and evolving government. John F. Kennedy, 35th, symbolized youthful idealism, confronted the Soviet Union in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and set the goal of landing a man on the moon. Lyndon B. Johnson, 36th, used his political mastery to pass landmark civil rights laws and his ambitious Great Society programs, but his legacy was deeply scarred by the Vietnam War. Richard Nixon, 37th, achieved diplomatic openings with China and détente with the USSR, but resigned in disgrace due to the Watergate scandal. Gerald Ford, 38th, his pardon of Nixon aimed to heal the nation but contributed to his electoral defeat amid economic stagflation. Jimmy Carter, 39th, emphasized human rights and brokered the Camp David Accords, but was hampered by an energy crisis, high inflation, and the Iran hostage crisis. Ronald Reagan, 40th, revitalized conservative politics with tax cuts, a strong military buildup against the evil empire, USSR, and optimistic rhetoric. George H. W. Bush, 41st, presided over the end of the Cold War and led a successful international coalition in the first Gulf War. Bill Clinton, 42nd, oversaw a period of economic expansion and signed major trade agreements, but was impeached and acquitted following a scandal. George W. Bush, 43rd, his presidency was transformed by the 9/11 attacks, leading to the War on Terror and lengthy wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Barack Obama, 44th, the first African-American president, he passed the Affordable Care Act and oversaw recovery from the Great Recession. About the content and support. Image credit. The visuals and archival materials featured in presentations like these are often provided by expert sources. Bridgman Images is a leading supplier of art, culture, and historical imagery and footage, representing collections from the world's finest museums and artists. Their specialists assist with research and copyright clearance for a wide range of projects in film, publishing, and advertising. Support for history education. Creating informative historical content is a collaborative effort. Platforms like Today History Academy rely on the support of their community to continue producing educational videos. Interested viewers can often contribute and even influence future topics through supporter channels like Patreon.